Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Get Healthy Tampa Bay podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kerry Reller. And today we have an awesome guest, Dr. Lara Cavanaugh. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I don't want to butcher your name in the beginning. But anyway, so this is kind of fun because you work really close to me and we have not met in person, but I'm happy to virtually meet you. And you have a little bit of uniqueness that you are a pediatrician and also a life coach. So tell us a little bit more about that, who you are, what you do.
Thanks. It's great to be here. I'm a general pediatrician and I'm in the Tampa Bay area, just like you, which is awesome. And I'm also a certified life coach through the Life Coach School, which I did a few years ago, which was very, very valuable. Talking a lot about what it means to coach and what it means to live, really. I mean, how to move through your emotional life smoothly and sort of get you where you want to go. So coaching is kind of interesting that way. So when you put the two together with pediatrics and families, and then you add a little bit of emotional coaching, because I feel like a lot of parents and families really need that. And I think that's probably how it started in COVID when we were all shut down. And I was like, okay, I need to really figure out how I can help my families a little bit more in their emotional side, because more and more kids are getting anxious and depressed, and the parents are getting anxious and worried. And then it's like the whole family. So it was kind of a nice combination to do the life coaching and doing general pediatrics. So that's kind of where it started. And I also wanted to sort of see what other women physicians are doing. And there's probably over 300 women physician coaches now through the Life Coach School, maybe some other schools as well that have started doing a lot of coaching on various topics. So that's kind of how it started with me.
Yeah, I feel like there are more and more physicians that are becoming coaches, and you kind of gave us the definition of a life coach, which is helpful. And I think coaching is becoming more and more popular, but still not that many people know about it or too comfortable with it yet.
It is a new sort of niche, but it's been around for a long time. But I think when physicians sort of saw the benefit of it, that realizing it can really move you forward in your life, making decisions. It can be weight loss. It can be career advancement. It can be just burnout. I mean, that's kind of like the vogue word right now is so stress. We're sort of in this busy, addicted to productivity world where we have to keep busy. And I don't think we ever really talk about our emotions sometimes because we're too busy doing our to-do list. And so there's a lot of different things that coaching can entail. And I think a lot of people have done it different ways in different niches. So it's really nice to see physicians getting some education on this.
Yeah. I mean, not just for physicians, right? For everybody, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Anybody can sign up and get a certification for a life coaching. But for physicians, I think it's helpful for us to help our patients even better.
Absolutely. I mean, I still think physicians are coaches in a way, but this brings it to a whole new level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because we're kind of part of the team, right? And we are encouraging, and it's a little bit different than what you consider sometimes, but maybe not. I don't know, like a team coach that you'd have, but it's more really kind of having the person figure out in their own mind their thoughts and their feelings about things and how to move them forward through those. So it's a lot of questioning, and it's not always encouraging, but it's really finding out thought awareness to figure out how you can get the results in your life that you want. So it's interesting. It's very, very helpful.
And I know you're definitely going to get all into the thoughts and feelings and everything, but I think we wanted to focus today on what emotional wellness is and kind of how can one be better on that and what their journey through that is. So can you kind of explain that a little bit? What is emotional wellness?
So emotional wellness is sort of defined by everybody their own way in so many, and so everybody has sort of their definition. And we were sort of sold the lie of the pursuit of happiness, right? So here we are going to pursue the happiness, and then every other emotion that's in the way, well, then let's keep pursuing happiness. Well, really, we don't want to be happy all the time. We really want to feel the full human experience. And so a nice way to look at it is that life is 50-50. And they sort of taught this at the Life Coach School, which was really helpful for me too, especially explaining to patients that, and even though the teenagers, sometimes you're going to be in a negative emotion. That's just the way you might be irritated, you might be annoyed, you might be exhausted, you might be bored, you might be stressed, or you might be sad, right? Or you might be anxious, you might be nervous. And so understanding, just naming those negative emotions, and then understanding that the other 50%, you're happy, you're excited, you're energized, or you might be chill, relaxed. Any of those sort of positive emotions. Sometimes they're positive, low energy, sort of, and positive, high energy, but they're still positive emotions. And that we have all of those emotions. And we just want to be able to move through those emotions a little bit better, as opposed to getting stuck in emotion. So So you don't want to get stuck in stress and stuck in overwhelm and stuck in being angry or frightened or nervous or anxious. You really want to be able to feel the emotion and kind of move through it a little quicker so that you can get to those positive emotions a little easier and access them. And interesting enough, the motivational triad is called, or the science of our brains, we want pleasure, want to avoid pain. And pain can be emotional pain, it can be physical pain, psychological pain, but at all costs, our brains do not want pain. So we seek pleasure, right? So we want to do that as efficiently as possible. And so our brains aren't really wired to just feeling pain. Like we don't want the pain, we don't want discomfort. So how do we move through that discomfort to get to that, what our brains want is pleasure, but in a positive way?
So is it helpful to label all of the emotions and kind of say what you're feeling?
So one of the things that's really helpful is, I call it name it to tame it, right? So when you name an emotion, you're in that sort of limbic system of your brain. And when you name it, you're able to kind of like calm down your amygdala, which is the part of that does your emotional part of your brain. So by just naming it, it actually just softens the emotion just a little bit. And it's nice, like when you're really frustrated, just be like, oh, I'm frustrated. And it can just soften it to do, yeah, I'm kind of annoyed. That's a little bit better. So you're moving through that emotion and you're feeling, yeah, it calms it just a little bit. And I even do this with the little kids. I teach the parents, when you see your kid throwing that temper tantrum, I see that you're getting angry. Or even the teenager who wants to just blow up because the mom just took the phone away and they're so angry. It's like, you're going to get angry. And they're like, I'm really angry. So it tames it down a little bit. So entertainment is a really, really quick way to access calming those emotions a bit.
I like that. I think I can use that right now with my kids. So that's really good. And I'm assuming like it also makes you more aware, right? You're aware of what your feelings are and that you're having this emotion that needs to be, well, it doesn't need to be anything. Let's hear what you're going to say about what it needs to be. But anyway, so what is buffering emotions? Because that's something that I know you guys learn a lot about in the life coach school and you teach about.
Yeah. So when you get back to that motivational triad, we're trying to avoid pain. And so we're looking for pleasure. So a buffer is sort of a negative way to handle an emotion, but it gives you a negative consequence. So it's avoiding a feeling, a negative feeling, a discomfort, and it gives you a negative consequence. So buffering kind of looks like, let's talk about over like social media, right? You're bored, that's your negative emotion, that's your discomfort. And what do you go to? People are picking up their phones and they're sort of trying to entertain their brain, right? Or losing their attention span while they do it. So in the end, and the other thing interesting about screen time is that it actually puts you in fight or flight. So it's a high adrenaline cortisol state. So that's a stress state. So here we are bored. And now we go into a stress state. And so now we're going to be exhausted, right? From just the stress of being on our phone on and off. And we're also going to lose our attention span. So that's the negative consequence from it, along with a lot of other things. But our brain wants dopamine. So as soon as you go on your phone, you get a dopamine hit short term. But that goes into long-term addiction and so on and so forth. And it gives you a negative consequence in the long run. Other ways to buffer emotions like overeating, over-exercising even. Some people exercise too much on their bodies because they're trying to get rid of an emotion. Over drinking, obviously, that can give you a negative consequence. Over Netflixing, over shopping is a good one. That was a fun one. I always thought like when I was tired and I was like, oh, let's just go shopping and buy this or that. And you're like, why am I even here? And it's because I'm in a negative, stressed emotion. I'm usually tired and I want to feel just a little bit better. So let's just go buy a new dress, right? And you know, that's a short-term dopamine hit, feel better. But in the long run, okay, now I'm looking at my finances. That was dumb. I don't need this. I probably could have shopped in my closet. And so it doesn't give you a positive outcome. So buffering is avoiding a feeling, and it's usually a negative emotion and gives you a negative consequence.
So it's like spiraling, not out, maybe or maybe not out of control, but like a negative emotion and then a negative consequence as well.
Yeah, because you don't want to feel that negative emotion.
Right.
Like who wants to feel stressed? Not me. Who wants to feel angry? Not me. I'm exhausted after I feel angry, right? The idea is to feel the emotions, right? That's what they're there for.
So what are some long-term consequences of constantly buffering your emotions?
So if you buffer your emotions, just remember too, because sometimes we go shopping and we need things and some things, you know, right. And we're on our phones because we actually need to respond to something or answer a call or whatever. So just remember it's a negative consequence. So negative consequences with our health being in that stress state, say for the phones, you're in that stress state, it's like your heart rate's going to be up, your blood pressure's going to be up. If you're on your phones or screen time, you're going to be sitting in front of your computer or doing video games, obesity is going to go up. It also doesn't help you access the motivational part of your brain that says like, let's go exercise. It actually, you lose your attention span, your creativity. So in the end, it's actually stressing your body more.
Like a long-term cortisol levels because of the fight or flight response would continually be elevated.
Yeah.
Right?
So you've got cortisol elevated, you've got adrenaline elevated. And when you're in sort of your limbic emotional center and you're not accessing the executive functioning part of your brain, which is your prefrontal cortex, the kind of fancy words, but you want to access that prefrontal cortex executive functioning. So that's actually where emotional regulation is too. A lot of us are getting emotionally dysregulated, and you'll see that a lot with our teenagers with anxiety and depression when they're on their screen so much. And they're so low serotonin, low melatonin because they're not sleeping well. And it just kind of, there's a spiral for those kids, right? More depression, more anxiety. And we've seen the suicide rates go up in young girls, right?
Yeah. So leads to physical health issues, like you mentioned, the blood pressure, heart rate, and then mental health issues, anxiety, depression, and whatever else. And then you mentioned something like emotional disconnection. Can you
Dysregulation.
Dysregulation.
Yeah, emotional dysregulation. So when you are in your limbic system, which is your emotional center of your brain, you get more reactive instead of responsive, I call it. So say you get angry, it's not the emotion that's the problem, it's what you do from anger is the problem, right? The action you take. So if you like slam the door and run to your room like a teenager might do, like they're really mad, they're reacting, right? They're not accessing their prefrontal cortex to decide maybe that wasn't a good idea. Now I'm probably going to get grounded longer. Where adults, we have our prefrontal cortex developed, some more than others, obviously, but we are able to make a decision in that moment. What do we do with anger? We want to feel anger. All our emotions are vibrations in our body, and you want to feel them. I mean, that's what we're here for. You got to feel those emotions. So that's the name it to tame it. And I call it feel it to heal it. So emotions are these vibrations in the body, and like anger is hot and fat to me. And my face is red and my grit in my teeth are intense. And just kind of knowing, okay, that's just anger. And then sort of coming to like not judging yourself, like I shouldn't be angry, but just getting curious is like, why am I really angry? It's usually because I'm fighting with reality. Somebody's done something and I'm fighting with reality like it happened. And I'm a big resistor where it's like something happens and then you get angry. It's like, well, of course it happened, right? It's the bee that stings. Of course bees sting. That's what they do. That's what they do, right? That's reality. So if something happens, say you get cut off in the car and someone goes right in front of you and you get angry, well, of course, because they just cut you off. But you have that split second to be able to respond or react. You can get mad, honk your horn, give them the bird, whatever you want. Or you can just be like, wow, that person's really in a rush. They're going somewhere. And I'm not going to let that anger build up and increase my adrenaline, increase my cortisol. And then guess who suffers? I suffer. So that's kind of like the feeling of the emotions is really name it to tame it and feel it to heal it is really helpful. And sometimes that's all you need.
So that's how you would kind of roll through these emotions that you're having.
Yeah. Like, so I'll give you another example. When you're tired and it's after work, you're stressed, it's a long day, you worked hard. And like so many of us will buffer, we'll go, oh, I just need like a cookie or a brownie or some ice cream, or I just want to sit in the front of the TV and watch, like binge watch Netflix, right? That's a buffering emotion. And if you just sort of sit there and pause for a minute and say, I'm tired, listen to your body and say, maybe I just need to go have a quick shower and shut my eyes for 5 minutes. What does my body need? But instead of exhaustion, stress, tired, actually listening to what our body's teaching us and telling us, we're buffering that emotion and trying to feel better. We're avoiding pain, emotional pain of being tired and stressed at the end of the day.
So how would you actually say that we stop doing this, stop buffering?
Well, I think the first part is noticing, right? Noticing. I mean, because I don't even think I was aware that I was shopping when I was tired or stressed until this came in. I think it's just learning to understand that this might be a negative consequence because it really wasn't serving me. I mean, I've got plenty of clothes, right? So that was kind of my personal thing. It's like, no wonder when my kids were stressing me out, I'm like, I'm going shopping, right? But for other people, it might be like they come home and they have a glass of wine. So just kind of stopping and noticing, or they have 2 or 3 glasses of wine and be like, okay, well, why am I really having this glass of wine? And just pausing for a second, oh, I'm really tired or I'm really stressed. And then kind of saying why, and probably because you had a long day, and extend kindness to yourself is always like the best, and compassion. So decide in advance. That's where that prefrontal cortex is really helpful, that at the end of the day, I'm going to do something for myself that is a positive consequence, a positive pleasure in my life. So that might be rest, might be going out in nature, it might be getting in the garden, it might be taking the dog for a walk. There's so many ways to de-stress and get that cortisol and adrenaline down at the end of the day that doesn't involve a buffer.
So I have a lot of people who struggle like with that post dinner or post work, either like you mentioned, nighttime drinking and eating. So you're mentioning pausing and everything, maybe pausing before you're opening the refrigerator again, but what other things can you help, I guess,
so I think first,
enlighten us?
noticing. And so when it's evening drinking and eating, mine's my M&Ms. I love them, peanut M&Ms. So I have to sit and plan in advance, make a decision in advance that I am or I'm not going to have M&Ms, and do it 24 hours in advance, and allow yourself your M&Ms if that's what you decided. And obviously I'm not going to have it every night and have like the family bag and sit there in front of the TV. That would be buffering. But I'll decide I'll have 10 M&Ms tonight, and that's it. And that's a decision that you make in advance and commit to yourself. In the moment, you have to understand that it's a strong desire, which is a very, very intense emotion. Desire is a very intense emotion, and it's uncomfortable. So here we are, uncomfortable with this strong desire to eat these M&Ms, and I have to sit there with that desire. But remember, emotions are just vibrations in our bodies, and they usually go away in a couple of minutes. So that desire is going to go down if I just allow it to be there and just sit with it. But they do say it takes, it's kind of like anywhere between 30 to 100 times for that desire to kind of calm down. But we need desire. You need to be able to have food. You need to desire food, but you need to desire certain amounts of food. So in those moments, that's desire. That's an intense emotion. So recognizing, oh, that's my desire brain. It loves M&Ms, right? And you're getting a dopamine reward just thinking about it. And then it just sort of reinforces that I really want these. I really want these. And then just notices that's just desire talking, right? That's that part of your brain that has intense emotion. And it's a tough one, desire, because you have to practice it, right? What you practice grows. So if you don't want to eat in the evening, plan it. Use your prefrontal cortex, plan in advance. I'm only going to have one drink, or I'm only going to have like 10 M&Ms. But before I do that, maybe I'll take the dog for a walk, and I'll have a bath or shower or something and feel good, or just take 10 minutes for myself to meditate, whatever it is, but still allowing yourself something. But for weight loss, not every day, I would say. Right. I mean, you're not going to lose your weight, but that's a whole nother topic of deprivation that we don't want to do either. When we restrict ourselves, we deprive our brain, and whatever you deprive yourself actually magnifies the emotion. So when you deprive yourself of food, I can't have dessert because it's not on my diet. This is why the diet industry doesn't work very well, is because they don't work on the desire part of eating. And so we have to learn to just notice desire.
Yeah. So first you said awareness, second, planning in advance what you're going to do when that situation comes up.
Yeah.
Right? So what if it's not something that you can really plan?
So like, for instance, like if you're going out to eat or something?
Well, I guess I don't necessarily mean like something happens that causes you to feel some emotion, and like anger or frustration or something, and they want to turn, let's say, to eat something that they know is not on their plan. So what if they can't plan that in advance, that were to happen, then what do they do?
Well, I think, so if you feel like you have a negative emotion, I think you should just notice it and name it. And sit with it for a minute. And sometimes it's just accessing a deep breath, right? I'm just angry. The bee's stinging. It's not working out how I wanted it to work. Give me a minute. Everything will be okay. And then kind of move through that emotion. And sometimes you have to sit with it longer than 1 or 2 minutes. You just have to sit with it. Like, this is not turning out how I wanted it to turn out. And just kind of sit with it. And then just realize that, okay, it's just an emotion. And it'll move through you. But it's that second where you have that time to respond versus react, and not just grab the cookie or grab the glass of wine.
Right. Yeah. So biggest thing is pausing. And
I think pausing and noticing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And our brain tricks us. Our brain says, I'll feel better if I have a glass of wine, and because it's a habit, and then it just keeps going. But actually you end up feeling worse in the long run. So you kind of have to notice that it's almost too, you have to be somewhat in that moment aware that this is I kind of have when I come home from work, I have to tell myself in advance before I even get in the driveway, like, I'm really tired and I did a great job today. I always try to tell myself, kind of be my own cheerleader. And so maybe let's do something nice for me when I get home. And instead of going to, okay, I feel like this. So kind of being intentional when you know there's just certain times a day, and it's usually late in the evening when we're tired, because we don't have the ability to access our prefrontal cortex as well. We're kind of in our emotional center because we're just so tired. And so that's where planning in advance is going to help you a little bit to handle sort of those trigger times for you.
Yeah, absolutely. What else can you tell us about emotional buffering that we should know about?
Well, I think that if you need help too, I think that's the first thing, because I think sometimes I'll give you an example of one that's really helpful too, because I think this is something that I sort of stumbled on with, and you might be able to understand this too, is uncertainty is a really intense negative emotion. And when we have uncertainty, what we do is we research on Google, right? Yeah. When you're trying to find certainty, we research on Google, and now it's going to be AI probably, who knows? Yeah. And we all do it. And we want to feel better. We don't want to sit with uncertainty. So I think that's a fun one, because uncertainty is another intense negative emotion that is really uncomfortable. We do anything to feel certain, but life is always uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen the next second, the next minute, the next week. So uncertainty is a good one to play with, because a lot of times people are scrolling on the internet to find answers, and they can't sit with the fact that there is no answer. In this moment, uncertainty is the answer, and how to sit with uncertainty. That's a lot of deep breathing. But I'm sure you find it too, because I have it with patients, and I do it myself. When you have diagnosis, you're looking up something, or like, what does that mean? What does that mean for me? And what's going to happen? And all these things come up, right? And it just kind of like get into that spiral of researching and not coming up with any answers. And the negative consequences is you're exhausted by the end. Like, it's exhausting looking up stuff and on your brain, if your brain doesn't want to do all that.
Right. And planning all these different scenarios that Dr. Google may have come across for you. Like, oh, if this happened, then, oh gosh, it could be something else. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's definitely difficult to sit with uncertainty, but your recommendations are to notice that you're doing it and then just sit with it and not look anything up.
Well, so you can feel it, and you want to feel the emotion. So feel it to heal it. So feel it in your body, because that's what emotion is. So you might feel like your shoulders tight, or because you might find your temples tight. Sometimes I ask people, is it a fast emotion or slow emotion? So that way you can identify it, because some emotions are slow, like sad, depressed, unmotivated. Uncertain, to me, it seems like a little bit faster emotion for me. It might be hot emotion, but then I know how to name it, and then I can feel it. And you can either resist it, which means like you keep fighting it, which guess what? You end up just keep being uncertain. Right. You don't want to fight. You want it to be there and just allow it to be there, or you distract yourself from uncertainty. You might buffer, but really you just want to allow that feeling to be there, knowing that it's just a feeling, and feelings don't ever kill you, right?
So how do you get away from turning toward a distraction instead of just feeling it?
Well, I think we all try to go to a distraction. That's kind of the point. Like, we all try to feel better, and it can be in so many different ways. It can be buffering, or we can distract ourselves. If that gives you a negative consequence, though, then that's a problem. But sometimes distracting yourself gives us a positive consequence. We're like, you know what? I'm just going to look at my flowers right now and just distract my mind, calm it down. And I'm just going to look at these beautiful roses on the table. And that's a positive consequence, because it kind of calms you a little bit. So noticing the emotion and then trying distractions can be fine. It's a positive.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good way to point it out, because even like when thinking on some approaches, like with food, I feel like Noom, not to pinpoint that company or what their measures are, and I think they're fine too, is like sometimes you're going at the end of the day, you're tired, right? You want to have your M&Ms. Well, I feel like they teach that you may want to substitute with something healthier. So it's not really realizing that you don't actually need it. You're not physically hungry, but you're going to substitute it for some other pleasurable thing. It's almost like a distraction, but it may or may not be a negative or positive distraction. What do you think about that? So let's say you're getting some sugar-free pudding instead of M&Ms. What do you think about how that would be an approach for it?
So that gets into a little bit of hunger cues. Like, are you really hungry? And then sometimes we overeat healthy foods too, right? Overeating is a problem because sometimes like I'll have a whole bag of almonds and I'm like, okay, it's very good for me.
Guilty.
But it's so easy to overeat almonds. So you're overeating healthy foods, right? So you kind of have to get back to your hunger cues. Like, am I really hungry? Have I had enough? And that kind of thing. And honestly, I think part of the diet industry, and it's everywhere, is this deprivation and restriction. Because when we restrict, if we can't have the M&Ms, our brain, the way it works, it goes into toddler mode. It goes into your limbic system, which is that emotional center that's going to yell at you that, yes, you want these M&Ms because they're so good, right? And so what happens is, it just persists until, have you ever done that before? You're like, no, I don't want it right now. I probably want it in about an hour because I know how I am. And it's like, I can only restrict for so long, and it's just not sustainable. So that's why diets don't work. They're not sustainable, right? So you have to, if you plan and you decide that like Friday is my M&M night or is my dessert night or whatever it is, and I enjoy it, and then you just move on. You don't have to make it into this whole thing of restriction, deprivation, because then you're just going to eat more and then you give up. Like a whole weekend shot, I'll start my diet again on Monday.
Yeah.
How many times have we all said that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I usually am trying to tell them, instead of substituting, really listen if you're actually hungry or not. And then, like you said, save room for dessert if that's the choice that you make ahead of time to do that, instead of substituting the sugar-free pudding for ice cream or whatever. But sometimes that works for people. So I really think it depends on the person. They're either going to be substituting distraction and then they get their fix, but as long as they're still not constantly craving the other thing, right, and feel like they're resisting something, then I think maybe it's okay. But if they're still constantly craving it and want it, and they're going to go overboard or throw in the towel, then that's not the way to go.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And I think also it's always good to sort of think about it the next day. And sometimes I have some of the clients journal about like the incident. So here you are, 7:00 at night, you've had your, and you planned it or didn't plan it. Say you didn't plan it and you ate your sugar-free pudding, but has some calories, whatever. What were you feeling in that moment? It wasn't hunger that made you. And so going back, I was tired, I was stressed, I was bored. It's the same habit. And then that's where you get all the mindset changes. It's like, okay, next time we plan it, let's try to feel that urge and desire without giving into it because you're full enough or satisfied enough. And how can you just sit with it for a little bit? Because then we get into that overeating, which is a buffer. So if we're tired, we're stressed, a little bit's not going to hurt. A little bit of sugar pudding's not going to hurt, which it's fine, right? I mean, you're never going to be like perfect 100% following any plan. Right. But if you can just start to notice, how am I feeling in these moments that make me want that right now, that desire?
I want you to speak a little bit more about the overeating, like the healthy food thing. So if you're eating these things, how do you know if you've had enough, or I don't know, just touch on that a little more because it was interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting because I think I do it frequently. And I think it comes down to like, we know what's healthy for us, like fruits and vegetables and nuts and unprocessed foods, but we can still overeat them. So we're not following our hunger cues, I think. And we're distracted when we're eating. So you get back to that mindfulness. And so I sort of teach clients, I say, have like half of it and then just sit for a minute and say, am I really hungry? Where am I on the hunger scale? Am I full? Am I full enough? Do I need another handful just to feel comfortable to get me through the next 4 hours? And you sort of have to kind of like write it out over time. And you'll start to see a pattern of when you're really hungry. And sometimes you're really thirsty too, which is right. To really take a drink of water. I don't think we hydrate ourselves enough, especially when we're really busy. But so I think just sort of monitoring, okay, there's something we call the hunger scale. And are you really hungry, or where are you on the hunger scale? You don't want to be starving, but maybe you're just like at a -1 and you can wait another 2 hours at -2 and then have your portion and then sort of sit with it. And can this get me through the next 4 hours? And you start to measure like, yeah, I can get through the next 4 hours.
Yeah. I use the hunger scale with my patients too. So I think it's an excellent tool I think the hard part is sitting and waiting until you're getting those satiety signals that are telling you, okay, you don't need anymore.
Yeah.
And then, like you mentioned, being mindful about what you're eating as well. So without
What
those
you're doing while you're
distractions
eating.
around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you're doing
Yeah.
while you're eating is helpful too.
Which we're all guilty of
too.
working and eating or whatever.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. We're not pausing, just eating and tasting the food sometimes. But for healthy foods like nuts, I usually make a small baggie of nuts, and that's your snack. It's just easier for nuts. I find that's the hardest one to stop with. I feel like you just keep eating them. Like I can eat lots of celery, it's not going to hurt me. Carrot, but there's such concentrated fat in those that they are so healthy for you, but it may make it difficult to get to your long-term goals. But I do
we leave a little measuring cup in our nuts thing in the house, so you can't do
that's
more than that.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah. Yeah.
I need half the size though, because my kids get into it. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to be eating an entire whatever quarter cup it is, or 2 tablespoons of nuts, but it does help at least. So they are mindful of, I don't need that much or anything. So at least starting with that, like you said, but there are times when for me personally, I may physically still be hungry. I don't know if I should be eating more nuts or something else, but after you've had that serving, you can eat more because you're still physically hungry, but maybe you still had enough nuts, so you might choose something else to eat instead. But yeah. Awesome.
Overeating is really interesting because there's all the hormonal balances that go along with it. So there's your leptin and your ghrelin and your insulin. And the ghrelin is your hunger, the grr, and then your leptin's your full. And if you're not feeling full, why are you not feeling full? Right. Sometimes we're having too much sugar in our diet, and then we don't feel that full signal because the leptin's out of whack. Then you got to really look at what are you eating too. So overeating, I find it's very interesting, but it's more complex than just buffering because there's different foods and you have to eat. Everyone has to eat.
Right.
You don't have to scroll on your Facebook page or your Instagram page. You don't have to do that.
No, yeah. The eating thing is much more complicated for sure than the other things that you can overdoing. Did you want to speak anything else on any of the other overing things or anything else?
I think one of the things that is really sort of technology has really come a long way and it's been really helpful, but it's really hurting our brains. And if we're on it too much, and it's that excessive screen time, and that's a type of buffering as well. And then I'm just seeing a lot of it in my teenagers where it's either video games, it's often video games for boys and screen time for girls, and parents, we're all guilty of it. But if we can really learn to understand what it's doing to our brains, creating inattention, poor creativity, poor concentration, it actually doesn't help our learning. It hinders our learning, emotional dysregulation, sleep disorders. It's all connected because I call it our neurotransmitter soup is all messed up, right? And so we need to create the serotonin and we need to create our own melatonin. And we have like our own internal pharmacy. We just have to access it. I call that, right? But we've got to disconnect because we're putting our kids in fight or flight, high stress, adrenaline, cortisol. We're in it. We're busy. We're working. We're on our phones. And then when we go home, if we go back into our phones or screen time, it's really creating dysfunctional youth and families. And I really hope that people learn how to disconnect and start to feel their emotions, because most of the time we're just bored. And if we're bored, that's when creativity starts. That's when all the ideas come. That's when all the solutions come. So sometimes we either have to do a positive thing, like play a game, go out in nature, throw a football or frisbee around. And even that creates more creativity and better ideas. But we really need to learn as a society to start to disconnect, because we're only seeing, the tip of the iceberg here. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And technology, like I said, it does serve us, but we have to be more aware of what it's doing to our kids' brains and our brains.
So what do you suggest for the kids? You like set a time limit, or what are the measures to get them off of that?
Every individual is different. So some kids can handle 30 minutes or an hour, depending on the age. And some kids can't handle any at the young ages. So it's really depending on your child. So if you see your child emotionally dysregulated, like very reactive, very anxious, very fearful, running out of the classroom, behavior changes, not sleeping very well, irritable, those might be signs that they're actually on their screens too much. And so that may only be 30 minutes a day, but what are they doing at school? Maybe they're doing an hour at school.
Yeah.
And for some kids that are really severe, an electronic fast for a couple of weeks is going to get your neurotransmitters back in order. But for most kids, they're usually pretty good, just maybe an hour a day. And on and off all day, that inattention we're creating is just creating so many problems and decision fatigue with how many times you go on and off your phone. It's so much better to have just like a 30-minute or an hour window. If you're an adult, answer your emails, return text, blah, 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 and then be done with it. And then just set to emergencies only. Kids, family that need to contact you, it's much better for your brain. So for kids, I think this is a real problem. I think it's a big problem for mental health. And we just try to fix things by looking at our phones and our emotions. And I hope, I think more and more families are understanding that it is a problem. And so I would rather get my child off the screen than have to go to a psychiatrist, counseling, all these things for hours, and the financial burden as well. Time away from work and school. I mean, if we could just get them off their screens and they feel a little bit better, I would love that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that in our own home with the TV on, and we're like saying, stop, no more TV. And then they get addicted, and then they don't want to turn it off, and then they're upset. And then I think you make an interesting point about the creativity too, because when we say, no, we're not going to do TV today, creativity, the games and the weird things that they come up with is just hilarious sometimes. And yeah, it's definitely spiking that creative side of their brain that wouldn't be there if they just sat there and watched TV or whatever they were doing. If I don't know, it could be a device too or something, but I'm just TV for an example. But I think it's amazing what their minds can do if they just aren't watching stuff on TV or their socials or something. Yeah.
And interesting enough, they do show in the studies that 6 feet away from your TV, the big TV is fine, limiting 30 minutes an hour, whatever your family decides, that it is not as bad on your brain as all the iPads and the phones and the video games. So TV is actually not as bad, but sort of the caveat is fast moving cartoons is very similar. And the sounds, because cartoons are just like bing, 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 and noise. Volumes. And so it's really creating the same problem with our brain. So you kind of need those old fashioned, slower cartoons and slower shows for our brain's health. So it would be better if we were watching slower cartoons and shows on our brains, but at least there's something the kids could still do. If you were cooking and you just needed 30 minutes, so they can watch TV for 30 minutes and everyone can accomplish whatever they need to do in the evening.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share?
No, I
talk about? Okay.
Yeah, no, I think that was really, I hope it's really helpful for people to
absolutely.
Yeah. To just sort of sit with emotions for a little bit and understand that emotions never kill us. They're uncomfortable, they're painful, but they're not going to kill us. With them instead of react to them by buffering.
I'm going to be implementing a lot of things that we're talking about tonight with my kids. Trust me.
Yeah, it's a great thing to do for families. I tell families, do it together. Like everyone decide, mom and dad and us, we're only going to have this much time for phone or screen time. And then everybody does it. Everybody feels bad. It's a win-win.
Absolutely. So where can people find you?
So I am at Children's Medical Center. I'm a pediatrician there. And then for my coaching, it's just by word of mouth. So they could contact you or Lara Cavanaugh coaching at gmail.com.
Awesome. All right. We'll put that information in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Lara. And I hope everybody will tune in next week for what we bring to you.
Great. Thank you for having me.